Hi there everyone, what we're going to have a look at today is a common problem that I get asked about, and that is from a large set of data, in this case fitness testing data, how do I pull out selected records for a particular athlete? And so I'm going to step you through the process. It's a three-step process, so getting your data set up, then pulling out everything for that particular athlete, and then pulling out a subset of that to display on a chart. It's really useful if you've had athletes for a long time and you may have 20 or 30 sets of data. Now it's a Friday, so I'm using my Mac, and what I've also I guess worth mentioning is that I'm working on quite a large project where I have, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 30-minute videos about how to do this process from scratch. Create a database, have some really sophisticated reporting options available. Working on that, hopefully it won't be too far away. But what I was able to do is take some of that data and use it for this video. And so what I've got here, as you can see in columns B through to H, some descriptions, so the test label, the athlete name, the team, the position, etc. And across to the right, just some data for skin folds, fitness and speed. And when you go across to the workings page, you can select an athlete, their data appears, and down here you can select items from that athlete to display on a chart. So we're going to do that from scratch using a few different tricks, nothing too complex, but it's often the case. It's just a sequence of things that gets you the end result rather than anything magic. I'm going to take you to a blank sheet. So at the moment I haven't applied any formats to this, it's just a single sheet with the random data in it. I'm quite taken at the moment with table referencing, so I'm going to apply a table format to this particular data. Click on Tables and choose New. Excel automatically guesses my data. I can apply a different color format if I like, why not? And it now sees that as a data table, and it automatically puts filters at the top, and all sorts of things happen. The key thing about a table is that every column has to have a unique heading, so you can't use data column headings that aren't unique. So as you can see, I often use a prefix in the front called EAF for skin folds and things like that. That way it's always going to be unique. Anyway, I'm going to add, oh sorry, forgot one thing. What I want to do is rename this table. It would have used a default name, so I want to rename that to something that means something to me. Instead of table 2, I want to call it TBL database. Now I use TBL in capitals as a prefix to the name when I use the structured Excel table style. I have a number of other things. I will see one shortly when we create a list of names. First thing I want to do is get our drop down box in place. So I know that there are 50 athletes, so I'm just going to cheat. I'm going to just copy them in a very easy way to our new sheet. And with these names selected, in the name box I'm going to type list. That's the prefix I use when I create single column drop down lists, and call it list of athletes. Choose a cell, data validation list, and I just created it, and it's called list of athletes. So now I can pick what I want. Alright, now we're in a position to get going and start making things happen. When you're using table references, you do have to make sure you know what the column headings are. So the two ones of interest to me are test label and athlete name. So I'm just pasting them over here so that I know exactly what that's called. Sometimes I just call it athlete or name, so you can easily get things a little bit wrong. These are all the data sets that I want to be able to pull out. The first thing I want to do is pull out the row. Next thing I want to pull out is the date. And the third thing I want to pull out is the test label. And I'll just widen that out because I know that it needs to be wider. And I'm just going to pre-format that to date. Alright, so the first thing that we need to be able to do is also the hardest, and that is to pull out the row numbers of all records attributable to this particular athlete. I'm just going to make that cell a different color because I like for it to stand out. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. That alerts people to the fact that there's something in there that they might want to interact with. Now the small function is what I'm going to use to pull these records out. Because all my data is sorted by date, I know that the first record's the oldest, the next record is the next oldest, and the last record, or the largest record, is the newest. So if I want to pull them out in order, I can use the small function. I'm just going to quickly demo what that looks like. I've just got some numbers there, and if I type equals small, and I select the data, and I put 2 next to it, it's going to pull out the second smallest number from that set of data. If I change that to 4, pulls out the fourth smallest item from that set of data. So small works in a pretty simple way, nothing particularly complicated, but we want to use that inside an array function. Now array functions are a bit complex. I've done a relatively in-depth video on how to do this before, which you could check out, but I'm just going to run through this, and I've stripped back the array function to make it as easy as possible. So I want to find the smallest row number for a criteria where in the table TBL database, in the column athlete name, if it equals the name that I've selected here, and I can't forget to lock that down. So if that criteria is true, I want you to pull out the row number, and which item do I want? Well, I want the first smallest. And so if I do Control-Shift-Enter, Control-Shift-Enter, and I drag that down, I now have the row numbers for the 6 data sets that are for Michelle Steele. And now you can see on the formula that it's got a little curly bracket on the end. That means it's an array function. Now if we just quickly check, and let's see if row 19 is in fact Michelle Steele. It is. Okay, so that's row 19 of the sheet, but it's not actually row 19 of the table, because the first 3 rows are either blank or column headings. So I need to just slightly adjust our formula. Just going to put -3 there. Alright, that's telling us now that in the 16th row of the database is where we find Michelle Steele's first item. Okay, so now we've got those 2 things. what we can do is pull out the dates that correspond to row 16, 66, 116, and so on. I'm going to use index for that. What array are we looking in? TBL database. What column is that in? It's in a column called date. And what row number is it? It's that one there. So if I hit enter and drag that down, aside from the errors at the bottom from row 17 onwards, we are looking good. And you'll notice that I used the table structured referencing, where I put the name of the database and then the name of the column. So I'm just going to show you that you can do it in a less structured way as well. So if we're trying to pull out the test label is in column D, which is row 4. So I'm just referring to the table. I'm not putting any reference to the column in there. Just like before, I'm clicking on that cell because that tells us the row number. I'm just going to hard type in column 4 because I know test label is in column 4. And so if I drag that down, we now have all of Michelle Steele's data. And now if I change it to a different person, row numbers update, data updates. So we're looking good. Don't need that anymore. So we're coming along nicely. What we have been able to create is our first subset, and that is just the data relating to the athlete that we have selected. What I want to be able to do is create one more stratification of that. And something that helps me in that process is to know how many records that Debbie Ross has. So I'm just going to do a COUNTIF. So in TBL database, in the column athlete name, how many times will you find the name of our selected athlete? So it's 6, which is great. I think other than the first person on the list, I think everyone has 6. So that's good. Anyway, knowing that 6 is actually quite useful. I could do a couple of different things with that, and in particular I can help control the length of the next named range we're going to use. So I could simply say, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to select that whole lot, go up to the name box and type list of athlete data, and over here you'll notice that capital letters don't matter. So I can select that up there, and that works okay. It's just a bit ugly. It's got all those number referencing errors. Works fine, but not particularly happy with that. So instead, what I want to be able to do, I can get rid of that by just choosing any value, is create a dynamic range that expands based upon this number here in cell C3. Insert name define is where we can create a named range, and I'm going to call it list. Instead of just athlete data, I'm going to call it dynamic athlete data. Now we always know it's going to start from this cell. So that bit's easy. I'm going to click colon. So that tells us the beginning of it. We just need to tell Excel where the end of the range is. So I'm just going to use the index function and tell it that the range ends that many rows. So I just clicked on the cell C3, that's our counter. So the range ends in row 6, column 1 of that little selection. And so now, when I create a data validation box, see if I remembered that. So that list is now a lot tidier. And on a PC, that's actually quite important. On a Mac, it's not as important because you guys display your lists a little bit differently on a Mac, and it's actually a bit nicer, to be honest. Alright, so here are our selections. I'm going to use that same shading. So now we've got the 3 options that we want to display. Let's just randomly choose, say, yo-yo and 5 meter speed, just as 2 examples. So just want to go to the database and have a look. Yo-yo distance is column X, and 5 meter time is in column AC, which is column 29. So I just want to use that to display or demonstrate both of the methods again. So there are 2 ways to pull this data out, with or without that column referencing system that tables have. So now that we know this is the data that we want to pull out, first thing I want to get is the row number. Tell me the row number, which is here. Just lock that up. When our selection matches up to this one. So that index match combination is incredibly useful. I use it all the time for this type of thing. So index and then match combined pretty much allows you to pull out anything you want from any table, as long as you know what the column headings and so on are. So it's time to pull out the data for our 2 selected items. Like I said, I'm going to do it 2 different ways. The first way using the structured references, and the other way just using battleship method. So index and our row number there. Now that should be fine. And the second one, no column heading, just a row number, and I know that it's column 29. Drag that down. I'll just adjust that to number formats, which has a 2 decimal place default. Alright, so we kind of have our little data set now. This is just for an example, so it's certainly nothing, not complete whatsoever, but let's just insert a chart, see what it all looks like. Alright, so there's our chart for the yo-yo. If I choose some different data, we're now getting things working a little bit better. I like having data labels, and I hate having prominent grid lines. So I make them as light as possible. There you go. So you'll want to do things a little bit more complex than this. I'm not even going to do the chart for the 5 meter speed because it's exactly the same as the one I just did. But ultimately there we go from a large data set to this smaller data set to this selected data set. And now typically how I set these things up is, in addition to having these 6 items available to pick from, you could also have the team average or the player average or the position average or a benchmark or all sorts of interesting kind of comparisons that you might want to put on top of this existing data. And you can make it even more complicated by having one be a line graph that sits behind the whole lot, for example a benchmark score. But nevertheless, that's for another day. The other thing I did want to show is that when you have a table and have a really nice organized layout with unique column headings and so on, and you've applied the Excel table format, then a pivot table is just the easiest thing in the world to get some quick insight from. They're not perfect because they're a little bit stiff at times to really make look how you want without some really good skills, but you can get some real simple things out of them with a few clicks. And I'm going to click this button here. My cursor is inside the table. It's going to ask me, is this what you want? Yes, it is. It's from the TBL database. I want it on a new worksheet. Okay. Sets up the pivot table builder, waiting for me to tell it what to do. And so I'm going to put the athlete name, and I'm going to put the athlete date. I'm going to put the test label under rows, and just drag this down a bit and find something. What did we have? Yo-yo distance and 5 meter time. Okay, if I click inside what I want, just in case there was more than one data set, I choose min, and I make sure it uses a number format option. Great. Yo-yo distance, I want to choose max. Okay, now at the moment it has taken the entire team, so I just want to select one player, and I might only want to select some of the data sets. But as you can see, it's a pretty quick way to get a snapshot of a player that you wanted to look at. We went through quite a lot of effort to do it on this other page, but a pivot table was able to do it really quickly. And the reason it was so quick was all to do with our data layout. Nice organized data, column headings, descriptions, and then well formatted data behind it. So there you go. Email me for this file if you want it. Drop me a line if you might be interested in the longer version of this video. It's still a little way off yet, but I'm really looking forward to playing it all out, and we can talk about it a little bit more. So a few tricks today: data validation, drop down lists, dynamic names, use of table referencing, and a pivot table thrown into boot. So hopefully that was useful to you guys, and for you Mac users, hopefully that's a little bit easier for you to follow than some of my PC ones.